Moving on to Romans 4. So Paul continues his argument about circumcision in the law of Moses, and he makes the point that Abraham was justified before he was circumcised. He doesn't say Abraham was justified before he was obedient, but before he was circumcised. That's the point. So of course, Abraham had to become obedient to God in order to get right with God, in order to be justified. Many evangelicals think that what Paul says about circumcision in Romans 4, I think it applies to anything we do at all. They think it applies to obedience in general. They say, yeah, Paul is talking about circumcision specifically, but it applies to anything. So let's test that theory. I'm going to read Romans 4, 1 to 12, except everywhere where it says something like circumcision or uncircumcised or works or something like that, I'm going to substitute that word and I'm going to put in obedient, disobedience, something like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take Paul's argument about circumcision and I'm going to apply it the way many evangelicals want to. I'm going to apply it to obedience in general, and we'll see if it works. And if it makes sense when you apply it to obedience, then maybe the evangelicals are right. But if it falls apart, if the passage becomes logically incoherent, if it doesn't make sense anymore, then that's an indication that what Paul is saying here only applies to circumcision. He's not talking about obedience. I hope what I'm saying makes sense. I think it will make sense in a second. So listen to Romans 4 when applied to obedience in general. What shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by obedience to God, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Now to the one who obeys God, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as his due. And to the one who does not obey God, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. Something sound a little weird about that? It gets weirder. Just as David also speaks of the blessing of the one to whom God counts righteousness apart from obedience. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. Is this blessing only for the obedient or also for the disobedient? For we say that faith was counted to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it counted to him? Was it before or after he obeyed God? It was not after, but before he obeyed. He received the sign of obedience as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still disobedient. The purpose was to make him the father of all who believe without obeying, so that righteousness would be counted to them as well, and to make him the father of the obedient, who are not merely obedient, but who also walk in the footsteps of the faith that our father Abraham had before he was obedient. This makes no sense at all, obviously. It's not true. It's not true that Abraham was justified before he was obedient. It's true that he was justified before he was circumcised. And the passage becomes logically incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. How can we walk in the footsteps of the faith Abraham had before he was obedient? You can do this with other passages in Paul's epistles, where you take what he's saying about circumcision and Mosaic law, try to apply it to obedience, and it falls apart, and you start to see what he's really saying. The verse that I'd like you to zero in on sometime, when you read this on your own, is verse 12, where Paul says that the blessing is for all those who walk in the footsteps of the faith Abraham had before he was circumcised. That's what matters. The footsteps of the faith, or Romans 1:5, the obedience of faith. That's what Abraham had. That's what we need. Circumcision is not needed.